Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today we're going to be looking at the latest polling averages in the battleground states and applying the 2020 polling error to see what the current outcome would be. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And so, looking at the latest matchup from Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, the safe red states are going to be the ones as follows. These are the states that he's performed extremely well in previous elections, to the point where he's won them twice in election cycles, including Maine's 2nd congressional district, as well as the state of Iowa. That's also going to be in the safe Republican column as well for this video. For Kamala Harris, California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii are going to be in the safe column, as well as DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont in the safe column as well, leaving about 301 electoral college votes to look at in the polling averages. Starting at Nevada, if we go to the state of Nevada and look at the latest polling average right now for the state, we'll actually see Harris is up by 0.7%, but looking at 2020, Joe Biden was leading by 5.3%, and if we look at the results back in 2020, Joe Biden only won the state by 2.4%. So if you apply the polling error, Donald Trump actually wins the state by around 1 or 2 points as of right now. Looking at the state of Arizona, the next Sunbelt state on the list, Joe Biden outperformed the polling average by around 2.3 percentage points. He was up by 2.6% here. In the actual result, he won by 0.3. So looking at the current average, he is barely down in the average, actually. Donald Trump is barely trailing Harris. And so that is actually going to put him in the lean column in Arizona. Looking at the state of Colorado, Joe Biden won it by 13.5 points. In the 2020 cycle, Joe Biden actually overperformed the aggregate by around a point. But looking at the latest polling right now, we do see a Colorado plus 10 from a Trump-Biden matchup. Nothing from Harris yet. So we are going to be putting this in the likely Democrat column. Looking at the state of New Mexico, the polls there did actually underestimate him or overestimate Joe Biden in the state by about a point or so. And looking at the average right now, it did actually underestimate him there. So when we look at the latest Redfield and Wilton Strategies poll, that ends up becoming about plus 6 for Harris, even though I do think it's going to be way closer than what people are thinking. The state of Texas, this is where the polling error is abysmal. He actually, in 2020, was ahead by 1.1. He ended up winning by 5.6%. So that's around a 4.5 point miss. So when you have the average being plus 6.1, it's going to be close to 10 points, give or take. Probably a 9.7 percentage point win, 9.6, similar to 2016. Looking at Nebraska second, the polling data does underestimate Democrats here, and Harris does have a pretty big lead. So according to the polls, if they were to be wrong the same way as 2020, you would have it going a likely Democrat. The state of Illinois, if we actually look at the polling average from the state, right now the latest poll currently has Biden up by 10 points. We are not using ActiVote in these polling videos ever again. They are not a legitimate pollster. Looking at Biden versus Trump, it is only plus 10, and Biden did outperform the aggregate by around a point, so we can put it at around plus 11 for this video. Minnesota, looking at the latest polls out of Minnesota, the aggregate did overestimate Joe Biden in the state by 2.1%, and looking at the latest average, she is ahead by 7.6%, and so when you apply that error, it does still have Harris a little bit above 5 points. Looking at Wisconsin, this is where the polling error is abysmal. Right now, Harris is up by 3.2%, but looking at 2020, he led by 8.4%, which is just absolutely abysmal in the state of Wisconsin. And looking here, he only won by 0.6. That's around a 7-point polling error and change. So if you were to apply that to here, you would roughly get a result in Wisconsin that's pretty close to likely. You have a 3 to 4 point win in Wisconsin, give or take. Looking at the state of Michigan, this is another key battleground state. The average does have Harris up by 2.4%, but the average overestimated Joe Biden by around 5.1%, 7.9 percentage point polling lead. And looking at Michigan's result, it was plus 2.8 for Biden. So when you apply that to the average, Donald Trump is also up in the state of Michigan. And more than likely, at the end of this video, he will probably be winning the election, as he will more than likely win Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So looking at Ohio in this column, we see Trump barely led the average by 0.8, and Trump actually won the state by 8. And now looking at the latest poll, Donald Trump is actually up by 9 points in our On Point Politics / Red Eagle, polling right now with SoCal Strategy, 600 likely voters from August 31st to September 1st. So this is going to put the state in the higher likely column, actually, right about, well, if you add 8 points, actually, no, that would be safe, believe it or not. Looking at the state of Virginia, this is another fascinating one. The latest poll is Harris plus 3. If you look at 2020, the polls did overestimate Joe Biden by around 1.7%. So if you were to apply that error, the state is coming down to just about a point, which is where my model currently has it right now. Looking at the state of North Carolina, this is going to be another interesting state. We see the aggregates roughly tied, but the average did underestimate Donald Trump by around 3. I mean, 1.8% here, for Joe Biden in the lead, and Trump ended up winning by 1.8 or 1.3%. That is a little bit over a 3-point polling miss. So that's going to put state of North Carolina into the lean column, and you get something pretty similar for Georgia, actually. Right now, Harris is up by 0.4%. Biden outperformed the aggregate by roughly a point in the state of Georgia, by 1 point exactly. So if you were to apply that to this, you would actually end up getting Trump up in the state of Georgia by 0.5%. Although I do think the polling error in Georgia is going to be a lot higher, because 538 is letting polls into their aggregate that are really suspicious. Now, looking at 2020, clearly Biden overperformed by a point in the polling average. In the state of Florida, we will look at that state. Donald Trump is up by 4.6 in the average. Looking at 2020, the average had Biden up by 2.5. Trump ended up winning the state by 3.4, so that's about a 5-point polling miss. So when you apply that, it is around a similar victory to Texas. However, I do expect the victories in Texas and Florida to be way larger than this. Now, looking at Pennsylvania, we can clearly see that Donald Trump pretty much is already winning the Electoral College. Harris is up by 1.1% in the average right now, but looking at 2020, Biden was up in the average by 4.7. He ended up winning the state by 1.2. That's a 3.5-point polling, basically over performance. So when you add that, Donald Trump is up in Pennsylvania by roughly the same amount as Michigan. It's about the same. They're basically even. In Wisconsin, Donald Trump is killing it in the state of Wisconsin right now. Looking at the state of New York, this one's interesting. The latest poll from Siena College is Harris plus 12. And looking at 2020, the polls did actually overestimate Joe Biden by around 3 points in the state of New York, or 6 points, in the state of New York. 29-point lead in the polls, only won by 23. And so when you look at that, I mean, that actually brings the margin down to Harris plus 6. So that is pretty fascinating. Looking at the state of Maine at large, we will see that the polling here has actually overestimated Democrats quite a bit. We see about a 9-point lead here, 13 points here, so a 4-point polling miss. So if you were to apply that to this Harris plus 17 poll, that does roughly put you at Harris plus 13, give or take, in the state of Maine, although I do not expect that to be the margin at all. When you reweigh the polling data to the party numbers properly, it actually does give you a only 2-point lead for Harris. So it's way closer than that for sure. And looking at the state of New Hampshire, looking at the latest average, Harris is up by 7. Looking at the polling data, the polls did overestimate Biden by around 4 points there. So that does bring the lead down to about 3 in New Hampshire, which isn't great. And the polling error there tends to be bad depending on where you look at. Connecticut, I mean, it's sort of the same thing. We have about 1 poll here, a plus 9 poll. And when you look at the 2020 aggregate, it did overestimate him quite a bit in Connecticut by around 6 points. So when you apply that polling error to Connecticut, it does actually give you a lean margin in Connecticut, which is pretty fascinating. Looking at New Jersey, This is another interesting one. We do have that one Trump Biden, matchup, which is weird here. So based off of that, looking at the 2020 aggregate, the polls did overestimate Joe Biden by around 5 points in the state. It was actually like 4.5. And so if you applied that, just to be fair, we'll go ahead and look at the Emerson College poll with Biden up, not looking at the Republican internal. Let's just use Emerson. Even with that, it's literally a tilt margin in the state of New Jersey. And that's only because I'm using the regular poll and not the latest poll. So just FYI. Delaware, we don't really have any polling data. I'll put that in the likely category. Same thing for Rhode Island. We don't have a lot of polling data there either. And so that is it for this video, guys. If you apply the polling errors to all of the current states based on the previous polling error, which may possibly be worse for 538 this year just because of how many polls they're letting into the average and how they're readjusting and reweighing all the numbers. Based on all that, Donald Trump is up by 312 electoral college votes to Harris's 226 in the electoral college. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.